Here are the Beatles. Here are the Beatles.
November of '65, at my house in Beverly Hills, my friend goes, I want you to listen to this album by the Beatles. And I got so blown out that I went to the piano and started writing songs, started making melodies.
I think he'd heard one of our albums and thought, I've got to do better, you know.
The inspiration for Pet Sounds was Rubber Soul. That was the one that got me going.
Pet Sounds, Beach Boys, that was the album, flipped me. Still does, actually, still one of my favourite albums of all time. Just because the musical invention on that is like, wow. But that was the big thing for me. I just thought, oh, dear me, this is the album of all time. What the hell are we going to do?
They got fed up with touring. By this time, in the end of '66, I'd known them for 4 years, and they'd been working their pants off all over the world, going from one concert to another, to a television show, to a radio.
There was a story here last week in a magazine or in a newspaper which stated about Paul saying, well, it's all over for us now. It's definitely over. And he's going to be spending his time in a recording studio making records, and all of these things about George going to India, and John was going to do a picture and follow a career as an actor, and what has happened with regard to new contracts and all that kind of stuff.
I think they had a very hard time last year, you know, touring-wise. I think it was the hardest ever.
And they got really fed up with it, and so they said, well, we're not going to do it anymore. We're definitely not going to do it anymore. We're going to just make music instead. And we can spend time making the kind of music we want to make, not just a simple little 2-minute pop boiler that we can perform in front of hordes of screaming kids.
Well, I think they might split up in 1967, because they're doing different things now.
The Beatles and your relationship and your projection, as far as they are concerned, because we still get letters. They are broken up, and it's more or less, sometimes people hear news, sometimes they hear just smattering of news, and I felt that there's no one who is closer to the situation and more involved.
Do you think that in the new year that you're going to be going your own ways instead of being a group?
No.
No?
No, George, definitely not.
What about another word? Are the Beatles going to go their own ways in 1967?
They could be, you know, on our own or together. We're always involved with each other, whatever we're doing. I mean,
Do you get if you got tired of each other?
No.
Yes. If you never toured again, would it worry you?
I don't know. No, I don't think so.
Wouldn't worry you.
But because the only thing about that, you see, is that performance for us, see, it's gone downhill, performance, because we can't develop when no one can hear us, you know what I mean? So for us to perform it's difficult, gets difficult each time.
You mean they don't
More
listen
difficult.
to you, and therefore you don't want to do that?
Oh, yeah, we want to do it, but if we're not listened to, then, and we can't even hear ourselves, then we can't improve.
Brian Epstein, their manager, was worried and said to me, the boys need a lift, they need a great single, what have you got?
And that new record started with Strawberry Fields.
On the 24th of November 1966.
Strawberry Fields I wrote when I was making How I Won the War in Almeria, Spain.
I knew about that from when I used to go and visit him when we were kids.
It's a Salvation Army home.
It was the place right opposite him where he used to go and play in the garden kind of thing. So it was kind of a magical childhood place for him.
Near the house I lived in with my auntie in the suburbs. Although I took the name as an image.
And we transformed it into the sort of psychedelic dream. It's like everybody's magic place instead of just ours. We took them from being little localized things to made them more global.
I know we'll just keep looking at this for a second. And I want to get your impression of what you've just seen. What do you think of that?
That is great.
I don't like their hair. They're ugly. Their mustaches were weird.
Look good.
It was different. I thought it was weird. Weird. They just look different than they used to. I thought they looked good.
They have a right to look any way they want.
The one immediately after that was curiously allied to Strawberry Fields. It was Penny Lane.
And then Penny Lane was a little bit more surreal too, although a sort of cleaner thing. I remember saying to George, I want like a very clean recording.
Penny Lane was a place that John knew about.
Penny Lane is not only a street, but it's a district. I lived in Penny Lane in a street called Newcastle Road.
So, you know, for me to just say I've got a song called Penny Lane, he knew exactly what I was doing.
I was into clean sounds, maybe Beach Boy-y kind of things at that point. But, you know, the fireman with his hourglass and all of that sort of stuff. Was us trying to get into a bit of art, a bit of surrealism. And they were all based on real things.
They're working very hard, actually, at the moment. I spoke to Paul this afternoon. They've got 9 done, he told me. I don't know whether in that 9 he's including the 2 at the moment, probably for America, I suppose. They'll put the singles on, although I wish they wouldn't. We always have arguments with Capitol as to whether they should put the singles on or not.
The reason that Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane didn't appear on the album, in those days we didn't include single releases in albums as we thought that was rather conning the public. One of the biggest errors I ever made.
It'd be very nice for America if we didn't put on the 2 singles.
Include something
and
else.
include something else, something fresh. Because the album is going to be great.
Musical papers started to slag us off because we hadn't done anything, because it took 5 months to record. And I remember with great glee seeing in one of the papers, oh, the Beatles have dried up. There's nothing coming from them. They've been in the studio, they can't think what they're doing. And I was sort of sitting rubbing my hands saying, you just wait.
Can you, without giving away any trade secrets, tell us anything about the numbers that you're engaged on at the moment for this new album that you're working on?
We've done about 9 or 10. And there's a couple of strange ones, a couple of happy-go-lucky northern songs.
Yeah, we've used other things that aren't us, you know, quite a bit.
We used the monkeys on a few of the tracks.
Yeah, right.
Well, really, it was Paul who'd been on a train journey or a plane journey with Mal Evans to come up with this idea of Sgt Pepper.
Sgt. Peppers Paul after a trip to America, and the whole West Coast long-named group thing was coming in.
I was coming back on a plane, and I was with our roadie, Mal. He said, "Well, pass the salt and pepper." And he said, "Salt and pepper." I said, "What?" He said, "Salt and pepper." And I thought he said Sgt. Pepper. Wait a minute, hold that right there. So that was the idea planted.
You know, when people are no longer the Beatles or the Crickets, they were suddenly threading these incredible shrinking Grateful airplanes, right?
Wait, what about that for an idea? You know, we'll pretend we're another band when we make this album.
And he was just kind of, to me, we were just in the studio to make the next record, and he was going on about this idea of, you know, some fictitious band.
So I had this song written of Sgt. Pepper, and he was 20 years ago, and he taught us to play, and we're his protégés, and here we are.
John and Paul always wrote a song for Ringo in every album. With a little help from my friends, proved to be the song.
It took a lot of coaxing from Paul to get me to sing that last note. I just felt it was very high.
And Paul wrote that song, and wrote it beautifully simply, with just 5 notes that Ringo had to carry.
I always worry about the vocals, you know, and I'm insecure when I do the vocals. I still am, and I was then. And so he would, you know, get me up, and we finally got that last note.
They were able to conjure up a wonderfully evocative image with very sparse material. And the opening to Lucy is a really case in point.
I even saw some famous star introducing, I've forgotten who it was, introducing a Lennon-McCartney show, saying about how Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was about LSD.
Contributed half of the song. I remember clearly where he had this little drawing that Julian, his son, had done. And across the top of it, in this very naive children's writing, was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. John said, what about that for a title, huh?
This is the truth. My son came home with a drawing and showed me this strange-looking woman flying around. I said, what is it? He said, it's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And I thought, that's beautiful.
And he showed me. I remember it very well.
I've seen the painting that this little kid does. I don't know if you've got kids, you know, but they just slap paint everywhere and say it's a painting.
I said, fantastic. He said, well, come on, let's go upstairs and write it, which we did.
I immediately wrote a song about it. The song had gone out, the whole album had been published, and somebody noticed that the letters spelt out LSD. And of course, after that, I was checking all the songs to see what the letters spelt out. Yeah. They didn't spell out anything, none of the others, and it wasn't about that at all, you know.
He developed it. I mean, he had a way of finding out what he wanted to sing, even as we were recording. It's a most wonderful phrase. I think, you know, if Beethoven had been around, he wouldn't have minded one of those.
And I was sitting here at 8:30, tuning the harp. A piece of music was plonked on my music stand. I gave it a brief look. Oh, yeah, right. And then this voice said, well, what you got on the dots? Meaning, what's written on the music. I recognised the Liverpool accent, turned round, of course, it was Paul McCartney. Well, first of all, I played exactly what was written. He said, no, I don't want that, I want something. So I thought, how can I make it different? I think he had an idea in his head of what he wanted it to sound like, but he couldn't describe it.
I mean, there's so many I like. I love She's Leaving Home, although I didn't do the score, and I think it's a terrific song.
I sat down, I remember sitting down with John in my music room in London, up at the top of my house, where we'd write often. And I remember sitting down and saying, I've got this idea, you know, for a song. So we were kind of jamming on it. I said, it's getting better all the time. He went, it couldn't get much worse. Okay, now we're off.
When I'm 64, that was one that harked back.
I mean, when I started songwriting, it wasn't to write rock and roll. It was to write cabaret. In fact, one of my first songs was When I'm 64. And so you weren't, your aims weren't set to sort of doing rock and roll. But when we started working together, I think I certainly, and I think John too, wanted to be a Rodgers and Hammerstein, a Lennon, McCartney. We consciously wanted to be, you know, a team.
Has George written anything this time?
Oh, yeah, he's done a great one.
Yeah.
Great one. A great Indian one.
My heart was still in India, you know. I mean, that was the big thing for me when it happened in the 66. It was after that, everything else seemed like hard work.
George is, I think, one of George's best songs, one of my favorite hits too. I like the arrangement, the sound, and the words are good too. Yeah. He's clear on that song. You can hear his mind is clear and his music's clear and he's presenting.
Just my way of trying to make a Western pop song using some of those instruments and some of those sounds.
We came along one night, had about 400 Indian fellas playing here, and it was a great swinging evening, as they say.
And nobody was there going, oh, George, we don't really want any Indian music on this album. We're a rock and roll. It was like, yeah, come on, let's see what happens, you know.
That's what I mean, that there is his innate talent that brought that kind of sound together. Anything to do with that at all? Nothing at all to do with it, only as an appreciator of the riff.
We were really spending a long time in the studio. And we were still doing the basic tracks like we always did. And then it would take weeks for the overdubs.
It starts out with Sgt Pepper and introduces Billy Shears, and that's the end, apart from the so-called reprise. Otherwise, every other song could have been on any other album. Right. Mr. Kite could have gone anywhere.
Walked into an antique shop in Sevenoaks in Kent, and we were looking at what they had there, and John pulled out this thing that he found.
I suppose the one I'm most proud of is being for the benefit of Mr. Kite, because I really was part of putting that together as a collage.
With all those circus noises.
Yeah, all the circus noises, and that really worked, and I was very, very happy about that.
Yeah.
To get the smell of the sawdust, John and I, both sat on different organs, Wurlitzers and Lowrys and Hammonds, and with double speed techniques created a kind of whirly atmosphere. Together with that, we had this weird and wonderful tape consisting of all little sections of real steam organs, cut up, joined together in a very haphazard manner, some back to front, to give us no tune at all, but just a noise that would convey what we wanted. Probably the most momentous song on the album, A Day in the Life. John was singing while he was playing his acoustic guitar. Paul was on piano. George was playing maracas, I think, and certainly Ringo was on bongos.
It was mainly a John song. He had this opening verse.
So it had two stories. One was the Guinness child had killed himself in a car. That was the main headline story. On the next page was about 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire.
And he'd taken a lot of it from a newspaper. And then I had another bit.
He had that one little lick floating around in his head. He couldn't use it for anything.
Woke up, fell out of bed, dragged a comb across my head. That was a little bit I had.
He stuck it on now. Instead of going on and developing that lick into the middle eight, which we would normally do, we got into how about putting a whole different song, which he already had, that had nothing to do with Day in the Life, which is all about being on the top of the bus in a barber chair and putting those two beats, which is a precursor to Abbey Road style later on.
And so we thought, well, that'd be good. We could put that in the middle. And we got the concept of sort of building it a little bit like a sort of mini operetta.
We connected them with a series of empty bars on either side of Paul's section before we came back into John's as a reprise. And we knew we had to fill those bars with something sensational. They told me they wanted an orchestral climax to fill these empty bars, rising from nothing at all to the most incredible noise. And with that, we joined up the two parts of the song.
So, you know, the sleeve came and we wanted to dress up and we wanted to be these people.
You know, we went down to the tailors in Soho, Berman's. We all got measured for all the suits and everything. We did it full tilt, you know.
And, you know, let's get suits. And, you know, it was flower power. I mean, coming into its fullest.
And anyway, you know, then Mal and I just went to all the different libraries and got prints, and Peter Blake blew them up and tinted them and made the collage.
Well, the original was made by making lists, choosing photographs, having them blown up and sticking them to plywood and cutting them out. So it's a very laborious process.
I suppose that was all a bit exciting, and I think it did reflect its time.
I thought it was great. Loved it. I kind of had a party, you know, sort of celebrate. That weekend was a bit of a party, as I recall.
It's a fine album. It's a fine album, but I did learn to play chess on it because I'd have so much spare time. That year did take about 50 years. We'd do the basic track, and then we'd put other stuff on, and then the percussion would be overdubbed later and later, you know.
And the biggest single sort of tribute for me was that it was released on the Friday, and on the Sunday we went to the Savile Theatre, which Brian Epstein rented on the Savile, and ran some rock shows. And Jimi Hendrix opened with Sgt Pepper, and he'd only had since the Friday to learn it.
For me, it was kind of a bit tiring, or it was a bit boring because, I mean, I had a few moments in there that I enjoyed, but generally, I didn't really like that album much.
Wasn't that spectacular? I mean, when you look back on it, I mean, like anything, it was great then. I think that period felt special because there was a great upsurge of energy and consciousness.
By the time we came to make Sgt Pepper, we were getting a lot more freedom, artistic freedom. So we started to incorporate more of the kind of crazy life that we were living at the time into the music.
Look, people just have this dream about Pepper. It was good for them, you know.
Certain substances around at the time.
Good Lord. You mean tea?
Yes, we had a lot of tea and Chinese tea and biscuits.
Could you close it again?
Yep. Somebody came in with a wad of colours, and I went for this one.
And so there was a lot of excitement on the street. There was a lot of people who were all trying to go on the same trip together, regardless of what they were doing. And I think there was a bond formed between a lot of people.
My sense of it is that Sgt Pepper album actually helped to create the conditions for the social changes that you're talking about.
I suppose it did. It certainly wasn't the intention, you know. A lot of people have talked about the Beatles in particular, saying it was all planned. But although they did what they wanted to do, they weren't setting themselves up as being prophets or anything, or trying to change the face of nature. They just wanted to go into the studio and make their kind of music. Simple as that. Even when I made it, I didn't think it was going to be the big one. I didn't think I'd be talking about it 30 years later.
Sugar Bum Fairy, Sugar Bum Fairy.